and good afternoon, everybody. I'm here primarily to, first of all, to welcome you on behalf of Sport England to this session, and also do a little bit of scene setting. It was a great idea just to go off and engage with whoever came up. And Steve, I hope you're back on from our chat. And I was also looking, was it Louise and Trafford Council, who's in a cool cellar? I'm very envious of that as well. All I really wanted to do was to highlight three things, if I may, not least because unfortunately these are the times. I've only got a short amount of time with you as Chief Executive of Sport England, but obviously I've got several colleagues, Naomi, who's going to speak in a moment, Chris Perks, who's the director of some of our local delivery, and also Justine Bromley, who works alongside him very closely in the Northwest and with the Greater Manchester and the GM Moving Partnership. So I think we feel very engaged with you as a region and you as a movement. And indeed, I would say probably feel like there is an alliance of shared ambition, shared purpose and shared beliefs that proves quite valuable to us at Sport England, actually, because I think it gives us the opportunity to have conversations like this with so many different people, but also do it in a context which makes sense for both sides, and to make sure that we are, as organisations, seeking to get outcomes that can actually move things forward, which is rare, or at least not as common as we would all like. So I think it's really, really important timing, and we've just had an hour, in fact, nearly an hour and a half, just between some of us, Hayley and colleagues, and some of mine as well, just trying to touch base on the real, the immediate, the now, and also still what that's telling us, and therefore what we need to be thinking about more for the future, and how we create an environment for sport and physical activity, and you know, embed that into the world which we are going to inhabit post the immediacy of the pandemic. And really that's the point of today in terms of our testing that. We are in some ways very close to the fulfillment of a very long, detailed and collaborative, we hope, approach to developing a strategy for Sport England, really for the next decade, as we understand more and more from partnerships like this, from our local delivery, pilots generally, which Greater Manchester is one, but also just from what we know works and what matters to people in their lives. How can we build a strategy around that can really transform attitudes to sport and physical activity in this country, and in doing so transform the health and well-being of the nation? And really I thought I could start, one of my three things is to start with the fact that we are very advanced in that now, and it would be, I think, welcome for people in some ways. Quite clearly the benefits are still anchored very firmly in initially, you know, how the government provided for them in their strategy for sport, which is those 5 outcomes of physical health, mental health, social integration, community cohesion, sort of individual development, and ultimately economic benefit that can flow from that to the nation. And I think also seeing some progress around that before the pandemic, before indeed, I should say, the floods that we remember hit at the start of the year and made quite an impact on people's lives in terms of activity. You know, we'd recorded record levels of activity across England, and I think above average levels within Greater Manchester. And I think it was starting to prove to us that while we had a huge amount to do still, and a big journey ahead of us in terms of some of the inequalities within that, at least we could see that the direction of travel was there. And actually, you know, the strategy is therefore, as I say, anchored in that belief, and also anchored in the belief that it's not only what we seek to do and what our key priorities will be, but also how we should work. We've done a lot in the last year, 18 months around that, around partnership, around collaboration, around our values and our culture and our way of working as an organisation and as a system or an ecosystem which is more reliant on each other. How that matters in terms of maximising assets and resources, but also most importantly, making sure that ideas, ambitions and programmes are sustainable. So I think we've learned a lot around that, and that was there anyway. But what's really fascinating, and I hope will be as part of the conversation today, and certainly I know where Naomi's thinking will go, is what this last 4 months of the pandemic period and what COVID-19's impact on us all has taught us about that, and how it's made it even probably more relevant, and confirmed perhaps even more that that approach is needed and necessary, that we need to embed people's sense of the benefits of being active into their daily lives from a preventative point of view for health, but also from a community cohesion point of view and a recognition of the build back and building back better, as Andy Burnham likes to describe it. So some of the challenges are the same, but more extreme. Some of the viability issues are the same, but more extreme as a result of COVID than what we were seeing before. And I think that that's a really important place for us to think about today, and what that's telling us. It's what we were talking about in the last hour quite a lot. But also it's taught us about the fact that even within this environment, those structural inequalities, those barriers to entry to being active and the reasons behind them have not only been maintained, but in some ways been exacerbated. And we are really interested in focusing on that, and how therefore we can and must continue to think about and work in partnership to achieve our ambitions and our goals. So that's my second point. But having said that we've done this work, having said that we are, getting towards a conclusion with it, having highlighted how we've learned from the amount of experimentation almost we've done in the last few years, the test and learn that the pilots, more than anything, the local delivery pilots have been, but so many other ways of working. It's really my most important point today to stress that that strategy is not final. There is still work to be done to bring it to ahead. There is still absolutely work to be done to think about how we implement it. And we need to hear from you about that. And that's the purpose of today. We really are here as an organization to listen. We want to hear different views. We want to hear views from organizations or individuals who might feel that actually they're not exposed to the conventional mechanisms for feeding back. It's one of the great power of the GM Moving Partnership and the ability to convene events like this. So we're very sincere about that. I mean, I laugh when I think that, because I'm saying to you that we're not here to just download, we're here to listen, but essentially I'm just downloading and then I'm going. But my colleagues very much are here to listen, to engage, and to learn from you from this afternoon. And as I said at the start, I don't think there's any better place for us to be doing this than with those of you in this region and Greater Manchester, because of the way that we start with a very familiar and very shared sense of what matters, and a shared sense of purpose around the benefits that being active and playing sport can bring, and the challenges that we face in communities, both locally and nationally, to deliver that. So I'm going to stick around until 4, listening to Hayley and to Naomi. But if I don't get the chance through this forum to say anything more or to indicate anything more, I do want to thank you again for joining us today. And I'm going to, I think, Eve, pass back to you or straight on to Naomi, but either way, this is the best way that we work in Sport England, is that I can set things up and then people who actually know what they're talking about can come in and do the hard yards. So I'm going to thank you all and pass back over.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the baton straight on to you, Naomi. Thanks for that, Tim.
Thanks so much. It seems my Wi-Fi has chosen this moment to go on a bit of a go slow. So if something goes wrong, if at least a few of the people I can see on this lovely window wave to alert me that something's happening, that'd be useful. So thank you very much. Yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm from the area myself, although my role now is working with Sport England, for Sport England, and at the moment leading the process to get us to our next strategy. So for anyone who doesn't know much about Sport England, we've been on a journey in our last few strategies, from, if you will, sport for sport's sake, through to recognising the value of activity. So getting more people active in this country. And we've been learning some really important things along the way. And I'm going to try and summarise just a few of those now in this few minutes, because they've led us to do something differently with this strategy and to try and carve out some new spaces for new possibilities and to do things differently in our next strategy. So I'm just going to talk a tiny little bit to explain where we are and I suppose how we've got to some of this, and then try and listen a lot to what you guys can offer us in terms of testing this and what you can see from your vantage points. So one of the main things really, as we've understood how people live active lives, so people who are active in any way, shape or form, you know, we've really realised that some of the ways that we divide up the sectors around us, if this makes sense, so leisure and sport and activity and exercise, it doesn't really make sense to people. So the way that we've essentially sort of carved out the spaces, when people are active, they choose different activities, typically multiple, that change over their life course, and you guys will know this. You know, it depends on what's going on in their life, about what their family is like, about how much time they've got. And it will be combinations of walking and trying to fit something into a day, maybe going to a gym class, and maybe all of that is because you love a sport, or maybe it's not, it's for other motivations. But you know, for real people, they're not making these separations between sport and activity and fitness and exercise. They're just trying to do things that they enjoy for reasons that they care about. And I'm just saying that because it's quite helpful. I think it's been very helpful for us in the last few years to go right back to how does this work in people's lives? When people do activity, or what we think of as physical activity, what does that look like? What are some of the patterns? And straight away you can see that people interact with loads of different factors that shape those choices. The streets that they live on, the parks around them, yes, the leisure centres and the offers there, but also some of the sports and community clubs around them, schools that they take their kids to, kids' interactions with schools themselves. You can see all of these important connections and influences that shape people's choices around activity. And you can also see that some people live in circumstances that make those choices really, really sort of low priority, because they're dealing with many other issues all the time that feel much higher priority, and sort of you know, activity or sports, so to speak, is off the radar. And the reason I'm saying all this is because where that takes us is understanding activity and active lives, not really as a supply and demand dynamic that people are interested and you go and people supply it. That is going on, but in a much bigger, more complex, interconnected ecosystem of people like us. It's actually a much broader community of people who care about an issue and an agenda. And all of those influences, whether designed to or not, add up to whether communities and ultimately the population can live an active life easily. So this is a big shift, isn't it? It's a big shift in understanding for us, and I don't want to assume at all whether that's a big shift in understanding for you. But as a national funder and agency and advocate for an issue, champion for an issue, so to speak, it's a really important shift for us to recognise that. Because really what it shows you is that to increase activity, to get more people active, to support more people to be more active more of the time, it crosses sectors, it crosses agendas, it crosses jurisdictions, it crosses boundaries. And it takes you to a place where essentially people need to work together to try and shape some of those influences around people, around communities, around places. And another really important learning for us, not to get too conceptual, I've heard this referred to as the macro-micro paradox. Lots of projects and interventions, if you will, don't seem to add up to whole communities or whole cities or whole countries being able to be more active. So what I mean by that, I suppose, is lots of funded projects here, there and everywhere, well designed, well intentioned and often well evaluating. They don't seem to add up to people being able to keep active over sustained periods of time, or to sort of really changing our relationship as a nation with movement and activity. So again, this takes us to this sort of recognition that joining things up, there's a lot of really good stuff, but joining some of that stuff up around people and around communities seems to be the way forward, and working across agendas and sectors and boundaries. So I'm going to, I suppose, offer one more and then talk a little bit about how this is getting us to our next strategy. I think one of the things that struck me the most is in understanding more about children and their foundations and their relationship with activity, and how much of our relationship with activity is formed in our early years. I guess I was really struck by something that feels really obvious when you think about it, but we've learned that the thing really that shapes children's relationship with movement and activity is enjoyment and fun, and it making them feel good and giving them confidence and making them feel good about themselves. And I'm not sure that that's unique to children either, the joy factor and the fun factor and just the joy of moving. And then, you know, in policy terms, I think everyone here will recognise you talk about sort of prevention agendas, you talk about the fact that things are good for people, you know, and how many sort of outcomes you can benefit from this sort of thing. And that's all useful language in the way that we talk to each other. But there's something about the fact that there's something that I think could be more joyful, we're realising, and more essential and more enjoyment based about activity, just more joyful, more fun, more easy, more normal. So these are some big paradigm shifting, I suppose, learning for us, and hopefully you'll see some of that reflected in what we're calling our framework document, which is essentially us saying, here's what we think we've heard about what really matters at the moment, here's how we're using some of the things that we're learning, and here's where we think it's taking us. So that's the intention of the document that you've hopefully seen. And this really is just to test where we're at. So here's where our heads are at, to fuel conversations just like this, to connect up with people like yourselves who have a different vantage point to us and can crucially, I think, really help shape our thinking, point out where it might be flawed, say what it might mean, identify things that you can see that we can't, and how these different vantage points start to give us a much stronger sense of what the possibilities are. So I'm going to be quiet there because I have a very strong sense I may have covered run over on my time limit. But that's some of the background, and that's the opportunity I think today. And in terms of what I'm really excited about, I really would like to know what you can see that we can't see. So for the purposes of this, assume no knowledge. Assume that we can't see what you can see. And it would be great to hear some of those things. Thanks.
Thank you, Naomi. Gosh, that longing now, I think, for joy and play and fun and all those things is very strong now. I was looking at photographs the weekend of my my parents who used to be play workers at adventure playgrounds of Greater Manchester in the 70s. These images of kids playing on adventure playgrounds in Turkey Lane and places of Greater Manchester, you know, and really reminded me of that feeling now of people wanting to get out and play and be active. Thank you. So over to you, Hayley, and
yeah, if Kaz can share the slides, that would be great. So thanks Tim and Naomi. Tim, I know you've got to hop off, so I won't be offended when you do. You can watch it back later. Thanks very much for making the time to come, and thanks Naomi for those reflections. So I was reminded recently by Tim, actually, who's on this call from Substance, that sometimes you have to look back before you can see how far so you can see how far you have come. And he was thinking, he used the analogy of when you take the kids to see the grandparents who haven't seen each other for some time, and there's that moment of look how much they've grown. And he was reflecting that back to me around GM moving and the journey we've been on. I am going to sort of take just a couple of minutes to reflect back before I tell us where we're going next. The opportunity that we've got here with Sport England is to co-design the future together, which is fantastic. But for those that are new as well, I know we've got some new faces in the room today, so I will just give a little bit of background. So GM Moving is our whole system approach across the city region to reduce inactivity and grow movement for active lives for everyone, with a specific intent to reduce physical activity and health inequalities. And our approach is to build from our strengths and across the system wide in terms of collaboration. We are on track to double the rate of past improvements, with the target of 75% of people active or fairly active by 2025. So the GM Moving journey started in 2015 with the Blueprint for Change, which was the first whole system approach to growing a movement for active lives in Greater Manchester. And in 2017, following the GM devolution deal and the election of a mayor for Greater Manchester, the system came back together to co-design once more the GM Moving plan. So progress since then has been rapid, and we really have grown, both I think individually in our organisations and collectively, and we have already reached our 2021 target of 73% of people active or fairly active. Key inequality gaps were closing, hopefully still are, and the whole system approach is really starting to feel like business as usual here. We don't have conversations that aren't framed in that way. There are still massive challenges ahead to achieve the 2025 target that we've set, and huge inequalities to address. And there are new challenges, as we're all aware, with the pandemic and huge financial pressures on the system as a result. So 3 years into the implementation of the plan, we're now ready to set out our future direction with optimism and hope, and take steps towards the refresh of GM Moving, which we always said we would do in 2021. So this will contribute to and align with and draw from the Sport England strategy conversations that take place over the next few months, and also the refresh of the Greater Manchester strategy and the Mayor's Manifesto in 2021. But just thinking back really in terms of what I think has changed since that 2015 blueprint was launched, and you can observe change in many different ways. So there are things that can be counted, and you can count active lives data and you can analyse that, but there are also things that can be seen, heard and felt in our day-to-day lives and in our work, and the things that are beneath the surface, so connections that are made, relationships that are built and trust that is grown. So all of these things matter in our work together as we grow a movement and support people to move more across the city region. There is, you can feel a real positive change in the way the system is operating and the way people are working together, and never more so in these last few months, and how we're all leading and behaving, the way that we work in, the collaboration and that continued sense of common purpose, which we know is so critical to this work. For those that were there at the roundtable event back in February 2020, earlier this year, Andy Burnham described where he felt we were at as being at the end of the beginning of this journey that we're on. There's a real clear sense of direction and a real alignment of outcomes. We talked a lot that day about all of the things that matter to each other, on all of the agendas and challenges and opportunities that matter to each other, and the things that people in Greater Manchester care about the most. So the system had come together to enable, which is really critical, is this culture change, system change and behaviour change. And one of the biggest shifts I think I've seen in the last sort of 3 years working here is in this understanding of this whole system approach, and how it absolutely has become our just default way of thinking and working. And the culture change layer that was a significant addition to this model late last year is something that we need to pay attention to now, because culture change is something that we need to build greater understanding about and how it happens, and ensure that it's cemented in our future work and our future way of thinking and our future way of, in terms of the work we do out of the new strategies. And if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it is that rapid change in culture is entirely possible, even in very short spaces of time, given the presence of certain drivers for change. So what can we learn from that? Because in this last 5 months, our language, the metaphors we use, our hierarchy of values, our know-how and our do-how changed over a period of days and weeks, and keeps evolving through all the different phases and iterations of this challenge that we're in. So we need to stop and notice and learn what's making that change possible, and use the learning from the crisis to transform our sense of efficacy as leaders in the system about how we can actually enable culture change in a real positive way. So in Greater Manchester, despite our challenges, we are always looking forwards, and the last meeting that we've just come out of shows this more than ever, is that we are always looking forwards, we're always optimistic and hopeful and doing things differently, and we do tackle the tough stuff head on. We are always striving to go further, faster together, to coin the phrase, but it genuinely feels like that, and no less so now than it did 6 months ago. Since 2015, the sense of common purpose has really grown, and the language we use to describe our work has changed significantly. We're seeing physical activity as much more widely recognised as part of the solution to all the complex issues that Greater Manchester faces, and we're moving forwards together towards the goal, never more so. Whether that's in terms of during COVID, the work that everybody in this room and beyond has done to keep GM moving, whether that's for active travel or supporting people to keep moving in their homes or in care homes or in their communities and outdoor spaces. So the evidence of that collective strength and contribution is present in the data, and it's in every conversation, and it's in the strength of the relationships between the people on this call today. And you can see how the extent to which our principles of reform that are set out here are absolutely lived out in practice, even and more so when we're kind of under the cosh. So we are getting better at having honest conversations and learning together and growing. We're getting more comfortable with failing fast and learning from where we get things wrong. And there is a confidence between us, I think, that we can lead and behave in ways that will drive positive change. So as we learn, succeed, fail, celebrate and grow, we need to be ever more focused on finding ways to translate what we're learning and share it so that it can inform our approach in real time and so that we can adapt constantly. And if we are all ready to work and share freely and openly, then we will keep going further and faster together. So if we've learned one thing in recent years, it is that the conversations that we have and the words that we use, that we can and do change the world. And that's why conversations like this afternoon are so important. So some of what we're learning has already been shared in a series of evaluation reports and articles and blogs, and we're now working really hard to translate that learning into leadership development tools, communications and other tangible assets and tools and resources that we can all use. And this is all part of an approach which is very much with Sport England and other national colleagues in a continual process of translating learning into action and making sure that we sweat our assets and our time and our capacity and our energy in ways that are most absolutely critical to population scale change that we need. So we really want you to join in that spirit of learning and sharing as we leave today. And one thing we have learned a lot about is how to influence in a system which is big and complex and messy. And it is clear that we can't possibly, 100 odd of us or how many in this room, build direct relationships with every citizen, every colleague, every leader across the city region. But the good news is that we've learned that we don't have to, and there's a lot of hope in that. So in bread making, if you're making bread, the absolute smallest ingredient holds the critical power to make change happen and make that bread rise. So each one of us can be that critical yeast, whether that's in our family, in our community, in our organisational place, or in our part of the system. And we only need 3% of the people of Greater Manchester to become those catalysts for change. And if they go out and spread the word and make change happen and share the ways of working and the ways of living and the belief and the commitment to active lives, and then the movement will keep growing. And you are all those people, you are those spark plugs, that critical yeast that are in this room and can make the change. And you don't need to wait for permission, and we don't need to wait for the new Sport England strategy or a refresh of GM Moving, because we can all leave here today and keep making that difference and keep talking to each other and connecting as Eve described. So to keep GM moving, that's never been more important. So we are at the end of the beginning, it feels like, and we've found loads of spark plug people, and my how we've grown since 2015 already, but now we need to go out together and find some more. So because despite the huge progress we have made and I've talked about in terms of the data and the impacts on people's lives and changing lives together, there is still a really long way to go. And as we move forward with COVID-19 recovery plans, GM Moving plays a more vital role than ever in population health, but also in economic recovery, in our green city region ambitions, and so much more. All the things in that word cloud there. So health inequalities could be growing now, and there is a real danger that we take our eye off the ball and our prevention approach, and that the pandemic starts to widen the gaps in physical activity that together we were starting to close. So as we start this refresh of GM Moving today, we need to respond and do that in the context of the societal, kind of political, economic, environmental and health drivers that we have now. And over the next sort of, between now and July of next year, we will align and contribute to all of those other strategy work that's going on, the Marmot City region work, the Greater Manchester and national conversations. And together we can do that by ensuring that we bring our leadership to it and we engage across the system and everyone joins in. And that we can do that work to create the conditions for this movement to keep growing, consistently framed, really importantly, in the context of this is about culture change, it's about system change, and it's about behaviour change, so that there's more active lives for everyone. So we do need to kind of hold our nerve. It feels like COVID is a real potential danger to kind of drag us back to very transactional ways of working, or to drag us back to purely focus our energy on crisis management, which is so important, but we need to lift our heads up. And we need to secure that kind of continued leadership capacity and investment in a whole system approach, in prevention, in population health, to address inactivity across Greater Manchester based on what we've learned already. So we can't forget at this point what we've already learned about how to do this and how important that is. And active lives data will keep showing our progress, and we'll tell us the stories of change along the way. And that in itself will keep inspiring us and giving us confidence and energy to do more together. So over the next few months, we're going to be asking people to come together to shape the thinking, as Naomi has described, but in lots of different ways. We've got time. We wrote the last GM moving, we co-designed it with the system, but in something like 6 or 8 weeks. Well, we've got a real opportunity this time to take our time over that. And the refreshed plan that we launch next summer will be a tangible asset in itself, and it will set clear priorities and will take us forward from 2021 to 25 with that same continued ambition and purpose and clarity. But we know from what we've learned and past experience that the process and the journey of co-design together is potentially as powerful as the plan that will emerge out of it. So together we need to use the conversations that we start today to expand that growing, ever-growing kind of web of relationships with and between people and organisations who can play their part, and invite other people in and find more spark plug people or sprinkle yeast or whatever metaphor you want to use. So we start this today, and you can inform the Sport England and GM Living strategy thinking, and that's what the conversation that Eve is going to now sort of guide us through in response to what you've read. But I would also selfishly, as we're focused on the Sport England strategy framework, is always be asking yourself the question, what does this mean for Greater Manchester as well? Thanks.
Thank you. So we've got lots, I think, to digest, to chew on, to think about from what you've listened to. So what we want to do is get an initial kind of snapshot. So if you go to Menti, just so we can get a quick feel of what your response is to the framework from what you've heard. So hopefully you're familiar with Menti. If you've got any device, you can go to the website and tap in that code, and then we'll share the questions. Hopefully this gives you as well just a bit of a pause, just to digest and soak in everything that you've listened to. Yeah, so the code is, for anyone that's struggling to see the screen, the code is 635237, and I'll put it in the chat as well. If anyone's struggling to get onto Menti, do post in the chat for people that used it before. Or if you can't get on, you can also just use the chat if you want and put a number in the chat instead. Okay, we move on to the next question, Kaz. So it's a 7.6 is our initial dip test. So in a word, and I know this is a challenge, it's a good way of crystallising everything you've heard. In a word, what do you like most about the framework? What do you like about what you've heard? So if anyone's looking at a small screen, we've got some of the words here. So movement, inclusive, purpose, collaborative, challenging, considerate. Naomi's made it onto the board. Inequalities, big issues, workforce development. Great, let's move on to the last question. And in a word, is there anything that you don't like about the framework? I have a blank screen. So it's an interesting one here with language. Yeah, so some people love ecosystem, some people don't like ecosystem. And I think it's a key, it's a real key tension in lots of the things that now we find a kind of a shared language. So again, yeah, a sense of is, jargon, details. The details very much to follow, isn't it, Naomi, in the strategies? At the minute, this is very, very loosely a framework for that detail. It's kind of the container to sort of stress test some of the initial sort of thinking and vision. I'm intrigued as to what these two ways are. So it'd be good to obviously unpack lots of this in the breakout room. So let's all stop flying through the air through multiple breakout rooms, but I hope you've had some really good discussions. As for the last two, please do keep adding your comments to chat now. If you ran out of time for breakout room 2 as well, please still add them to chat, because the more content we've got in there, the more we can make sure that we've sense checked our thinking, Sport England's thinking, and gathered all your views. Really grateful to all of you in thinking about how you then help take these conversations out into the spaces and places that you are. This is not representative of Greater Manchester people, so what's the role that all of us can play in further sense checking our thinking in all those different places, and encouraging others to come and join in and be part of the co-design over the next 12 months. So there is one last question, which is just for all of us to muse on, which Kaz will put up on the screen, to really think about what this means in terms of possibilities for all of us in Greater Manchester. So we're thinking about national strategy for England. And then if all the things that you've put forward to take it to 10 out of 10, for that to be the best strategy it possibly could be, and for that to be implemented, what possibilities does that bring to all of us? So it'd be great if you could just share, what does that actually mean? What could the impact of that be for people in places in Greater Manchester? And if you could share your thoughts in the chat, that would be great. I'm going to just hand over, Naomi, if that's okay to you, give people a bit of space, but giving you pre-warning, if you've got any final reflections. Also, Chris, you're, I think, still here. If either of you got any final thoughts, or if anyone else from GM Moving that again wants to make any final reflections before I say what the next steps will be.
Thanks so much, Eve, and thanks so much, everyone. I mean, the major thing to say is this has just been absolutely fascinating and just tremendously valuable. Just even trying to follow the chat, but in the breakout rooms as well. I thought you'd be interested to know that there's some stuff that's coming up that now is starting to feel very thematic, feedback from across the country and across sectors and across sort of vantage points. I prefer that in sectors, and they feel like things like language, clarity, but also some of the big issues like workforce and people and skills and capacity. So we're really noticing now some themes. I wanted to say that our next few months, whilst we're sort of finalising, I suppose, some of the more detailed thinking, we want to hold some spaces around these themes. So to talk more about what do people mean by this? What are some of the challenges at the moment? What are the opportunities? So we can keep connected on that, and sort of inviting people into more like questions and topics and spaces on some of these themes. So that's a sort of more logical next step. There's some ways of thinking and talking about this that people have put forward that feel really powerful. Things like the gear change documents, you know, the things that enable us to lift out of sectors and agendas. We just ended up talking in our breakout group about a movement for movement, that this transcends sector, it transcends service. There's something quite essential about a movement for movement in this nation, and about how every one of us has a connection to that personally and professionally. And so there's some really big sort of framing narrative stuff that people have offered that feels crucial. But also I can see ideas that have come through around you know, what this looks like when it's done well, things that we could really tangibly do to improve the value, I suppose, of Sport England's contribution. And that's the major question I'm still holding. And you know, really welcome any follow-ups on this. It's probably the one we all hold, which is in this very interconnected space around an issue that we all care about. What is the unique and consequential contribution of me and us? And you know, so I am thinking about what does Sport England add? What is the unique and consequential contribution that is needed at the moment? Recognising we are in a position in something much, much bigger. So I'm sorry to leave with a question and not an answer, but that's sort of that's the main question I'm holding here. And I think we've had some really good steers about what that might be.
Thank you. That's a great summary and a good question to end on, I think, as we all think what are the unique contributions we can make individually, but also in the rooms that we're in, you know, whoever is in that room, what's the unique conversation that those people can have in different spaces. So I think it just falls to me just to say a big thank you to all of you for turning up today, for contributing, for your honesty, for all your insight that you bring, which, you know, will enable us to collectively come to something that will be all the better, all the stronger, and will mean something to people and people's lives in GM. So thank you for that. In terms of next steps, we are committing to taking and trying to cluster and make sense of all the different notes we've taken from the breakout rooms and from chat. I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm not sure who's actually going to do the practical cog turning on that. We'll work that one out ourselves, but to then sharing that and to think about what next. So we certainly, as GM Moving, as Hayes said in our co-design process, thinking about a series of different sort of thematic events, but very much for everybody across the system to come together as part of leading up to our new strategy. And we'll continue the dialogue with Sport England around what does this mean in the continuation of development affairs, and then implementing it, all of us, hands in the soil. So I think that's it. To say big thank you